Well, good morning. Again, if you are a guest and you think this is a bit unusual, you know what? You're in good company because our regular attenders are thinking the same thing. This is a little unusual. I was raised by a Jewish father who had become a Christian. He was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home, and both of his parents were Russian Jews, which means their families didn't originate from Germany or some other place. They originated, at least in the 1900s, from Russia. And I was kind of raised, like a lot of kids are, learning about our family history. And for us, one of the ways that it was explained to us, one of the movies or plays, if you would, that was held in high regard was the play Fiddler on the Roof. If you're familiar with the play or the movie, it is based on the experience of the Russian Jews who were chased out of Russia by the Tsar. In fact, in that movie, one of the characters is the tailor Madakamzoy, and my grandfather was a tailor. And so his family, my grandfather's family, and my grandmother's family were both chased out of Russia by the Tsar. At least they got to leave Russia. Both came through Ellis Island. Their families then moved on to Philadelphia, and that's where they met and got married and had my father. And the rest is history. And as you can well imagine, that it added for a unique dynamic in my home as I was raised with these Jewish grandparents, and of course my grandparents on my mother's side were what we call goyim. They were Gentiles, and my mom had been adopted, so there wasn't as much rich family history on that side because it really began with her parents because she was adopted. Whereas my father, stories were told, and then just being Jewish, period, is a major event. And stories were told from the Hebrew scriptures and about our family that were passed down to my father, which was passed down from his parents, from their grandparents, and so on, and such forth. And in essence, that is what we're talking about. When we talk about our roots, when we're gathering together as a church, we're talking about the power of who we are as a people. We're not just gathering together and saying, hey, let's look at a book and study it together. And we're not just coming together and saying, you know what, 1,700 years ago, these smart people who were head of the church got together and they decided to put together a little saying that we memorize, and so let's study that. It's so much bigger than that. It is our roots. It is our family heritage. And I want to begin by framing it that way so that we don't approach this, if you would, in an academic way, in a purely, study fashion. Because it really was never meant, and we started by reading the Shema, right? And at the heart of the Shema is pass this down from generation to generation. This is a heritage. It isn't just the religion we practice. This is our very life. This is our identity. If you're familiar with the Fiddler on the Roof, right, he had several daughters, and the first daughter comes to him, and she kind of makes an agreement on her own without the father. And that's an issue, but they get over it. And then the second daughter meets a guy. He's a little bit of a radical. He's not so much into some of the Jewish traditions, but they get over that. And one of my favorite lines, and I know that I'm gonna go off the subject here, but I got to share it here. One of my favorite lines is with the second son. They come to him and say, "We're not asking for your permission. We only want your blessing." And he has this, debate in his mind, and then he comes back and he says, "You have my blessing and my permission," which I love. But the third daughter falls in love with a Russian, an Orthodox Greek Russian. or Orthodox Russian, actually, it wouldn't be Greek. Somebody not of the faith, and that he cannot allow. Tradition stops there. And there is a broken conflict. Now, there's a sign of hope at the end. In fact, my grandparents weren't very happy with my father when he became a Christian and kind of distanced. And then he had children, grandchildren. And lo and behold, Grandma and Grandpa started showing up again. So what I want to share with you over these moments is our roots, our heritage. Not my heritage, because I happen to have some Jewish background, but our heritage as followers and believers in Christ and in God. And so let's start with the first line. The whole Nicene Creed is actually written in the back of your in your handout, in your bulletin on the back. We're not going to go through the whole thing. We're going to take it line for line, because here's the thing you need to understand. The creed, each line is packed with the meaning of Scripture. There's literally hundreds of scriptures that back up each line. So in and of itself, the creed is not Scripture, and it does not carry authority all by itself, the statement. But what the statement represents is, like I said, hundreds of scriptures that support that. So what you'll see in your handout as I go over each line, each little part, I've printed several scriptures that also support that idea. There's many, many more, but it would be thick if I printed all of them. All right, so I gave you a good general thing, so you could do that study on your own. But the first line of the creed starts like this. It says, I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. This creed begins with the idea that I believe in one God. Now, the first thing I want to point out here is that the nature of a creed is I believe. Now, most of you all were probably raised, if you were familiar with this at all, you recited this as a congregation, as a church at whole, as a group. And so you probably said, we believe. But in essence, the creed was written as a personal confession that we'd also say together, but initially it was a personal confession. As a matter of fact, if you go back to the Reformation, when Protestantism, when they protested that the Catholic Church had started adding actually a lot to this creed. We agree along with our Catholic brothers and sisters on this creed. It's just all the extra stuff that we kind of have some disagreement, all the extra biblical stuff that we have some disagreement. But on this creed, and when you became a Christian, you went through a affirmation, and you usually had to declare one of the creeds, the Nicene being one of them, the Apostles might be in the other one, and affirm that you believe this. It is a personal statement of faith. And it matters. It matters. If you've ever taken a psychology class, or maybe you've ever been to therapy, you probably heard the idea that when you're dealing with action, you got to trace it back. When there's an action in your life that is broken, you trace it back. And you trace it back to the initial thought. And that thought, when a thought comes in your head, that thought gets filtered through a belief. Based on that belief, you'll have certain feelings. Based on that feeling, then, you will act. Let me give an example. You wake up in the morning, you go to the mirror, you look in the mirror, and you have bedhead. Okay? Or for some of you, you just notice there ain't no hair. Either way, you have a thought. Something's off. Now, if your fundamental belief is, my value is reflected in how I look, you're going to feel ugly. You're going to feel there's something wrong. Based on that belief, you feel that. And then if there's a knock on the door or whatnot, or something going on in the house, you ain't going to go out, because based on your feeling, you can't go anywhere. You can't see anyone until you start looking good, if that's possible. On the other hand, same thing. You go look in the mirror, same person, same bedhead or lack of hair, whatever the case may be. If your fundamental belief is that my beauty either comes from my character, my inside, or what I look like absolutely doesn't change with what it looks like on the outside, and you see that, you might laugh, like, oh, look at that funny hair, right? And therefore the same thing, if you hear a knock on the door or you don't have time to get all prettied up, no big deal. You have different feelings, you have positive feelings, even though it's the same image, and therefore you act different. All that to say, what you believe matters. It matters. And this creed starts out with saying, I believe. In other words, I'm going to begin to sift. When I have a thought, when I have an experience, when I go through life, it is going to go through the filter of this. I believe, ... The very next part of this is, I believe that they're, right, in one God. Now, this is loaded. Loaded. It'd be easy for you and I to miss this. But in this simple phrase, in one God, in essence, our early Christian fathers are saying this: we agree with the entire Old Testament, with the Jewishness of Jesus and the early apostles. Everything that the Hebrew Scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, teaches, we believe and affirm. Thank you very much. I got a little bit of a cold today. We believe in one God. Deuteronomy 6:4 says this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And as I was telling you, even now, every morning, a good Jew will say this prayer. Even if they just say that one line, they don't say everything that we read this morning. They'll say at least that one line. As a matter of fact, Christ himself affirms this in Mark 12. A lot of folks are trying to trip up Jesus, and it's not working. And it says this, in starting verse 28. One of the teachers of the law came, and they heard them debating, trying to trick Jesus. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? Phenomenal question. The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. And then he quotes Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. Then he quotes a verse from Leviticus. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Jesus affirms there is only one God. And it's not a new God. He didn't come and all of a sudden say, hey, let me kind of tell you about this new thing. When Jesus came, he stood on the shoulders of all the prophets that had come before him and was in complete agreement with their explanation, with their understanding of who God is. And when the early church gathered, it too gathered and said, we affirm, this is now 300 years later than Jesus, we affirm what Jesus affirmed, what the Hebrew Scriptures affirm, that there is only one God. And it was the God who created, it was the God of Abraham, it was the God of Isaac and Jacob, it was the God who led the Israelites out of Egypt, it was the God who established the city of Jerusalem and the temple. It was the God who judged his people and scattered them to the winds, first to the Assyrians and then to the Babylonians. It was the God who brought them a small segment back. It was the same God who had been silent for 400 years before Jesus came. It was the God of Jesus. It was then the God who raised Jesus from the dead, and it was the God who began the church, and now we, the church in 325, and now we, the church in 2014, affirm there is still only one God, and he is the same God. Why is this important? Remember I told you last week, you got to ask the why behind the what. That's not just the what, but there is some good why. 2001, there was a study done by Marshall Duke and Robin Fivush, and they wanted to basically ask the question, did it matter if kids knew their roots? So they asked the do you know questions. Examples were, do you know where your grandparents grew up? Do you know where your mom and dad went to high school? Do you know where your parents met? Do you know about the story of your birth? So on and such forth. And what they found is this. The more children knew about their family's history, the stronger the sense of control over their own lives. The higher their self-esteem and the more successful they believed their families function. What was very interesting is this was done on the East Coast in early 2001. Later that year, 9/11 happened. And most of their kids had been impacted by that event. And so they took the opportunity and they went back and they asked the kids about their feelings and how they were dealing with the issues surrounding 9/11. And what they found is, once again, those kids that had deep family roots and understanding were responding in healthier ways and more secure than the kids who didn't. I believe is a powerful, powerful tool. It makes a difference in your life. It makes an absolute difference, especially in this day and age where with a click you can get online and ask a question and you'll get 100 different answers from 100 different experts. How do you know which way to go? And if you're not rooted, if you don't have a thing to root you and say, this is what I know to be true, these are my roots, then you will just be swayed with the wind and you will develop emotional whiplash. I believe matters. It matters. Now, in Judaism, they don't spend a whole time debating on the existence of God. In a Jewish mindset, the fact that the universe exists is sufficient proof that God exists. They accept it almost without question. The Torah says it, we can see it, therefore it's true. I think part of it also for Judaism is the fact that it's not a very evangelistic faith, if you would. They're not going out and trying to convince others. And so we talk more about how do you know God is real than our forefathers did. On the other hand, they also would say this. Abraham knew him. Isaac knew him. Jacob knew him. Our relatives in Egypt knew him. Our relatives in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem was first established, knew him. And they would go on and on and on and on. They wouldn't speak of something out there, theoretical. They would talk about the family history. This is our family history. This is true. And today we even say, you know what? How do you know that's true? It's really simple. Look at everything that's provable in the Bible. Okay? You can't prove that someone did a miracle. But everything that's provable, the people, the places, and the times. Do you know that we're now living in an age where 97% or more of the history of the Bible is proven archaeologically, scientifically. Things that just 100 years ago they said were myths, like David was a myth, Jericho was a myth. All these places, all these people were myths, are now true. And that percentage gets smaller every year. They have yet to find one archaeological dig that said, it didn't happen the way the Bible said. Every time they find something in history is 100% accurate. You want to know if the rest is true? Well, if grandma and grandpa were telling everything else and it's established, why wouldn't their experience with the God of gods, the Lord of lords, and the King of kings also be true? In essence, we know it's true because we experience today. And why is it important that he is one? If you're familiar at all with some of the Greek stories and the idea of multi-gods, they're always competing. When by the very fact that you follow one means you make another one mad. Why is it important that there's only one God? Well, first of all, then there's only one way. There's only one God that you need to know and to love and to be loved by, and you don't have to worry about these competing foes. Secondly, if there's only one God, then there's only one relationship. And there's only one truth. Because if there is no God, I want you to think about this for a moment. If there is no God, that matters significantly. Because then this is all chance. This is all just something magical happened in a pool somewhere, and whammo, here you are. You are soon to be gone, and life has no meaning, has no purpose. All the time and effort that you're putting in your children and the next generation, why? Why? It's all random. The only thing is the now. Therefore, any good you do is not good by definition. There is no good. There's only survival. There's only get the most out of life. Why in the world would you ever use your money and your resources to leave a better world or to help somebody else? That is insanity. If there's no God, that's insanity. Because it's just natural selection. It is survival of the fittest. Survive and thrive and forget the rest of the world. You're not helping anything. That's why it matters that there is God and He is one. And it goes on to say not only is there one God, but that He is the Father. He is the Father. God has revealed Himself as the Father. The Talmud, which is an extra Jewish writing beyond the Scriptures, teaches that there are three participants in the formation of every human being. The mother and father, who provide the physical form, and God, who provides the soul, the personality, and the intelligence. It is said that one of God's greatest gifts to humanity is the knowledge that we are His children and created in His image. The Hebrew Scriptures, Old Testament teaches us this in Isaiah 64:8. It says, "Yet, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay. You are the potter. We are all the work of your hand." And then in the New Testament, John would affirm, "How great is the love the Father has lavished on us." He loves us. That we should be called children of God. And this is what we are. The reason the world did not know us is that it did not know Him. Dear friends, now we are the children of God. And what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. He is our Father. And again, it's not just that fact. Why is it important? Why is it important that He is the Father? Well, there's a couple things I can think of. First of all, it makes it a relationship. There's one thing to be in the kingdom, if you would, of a dictator, even a benevolent dictator. If you're in the kingdom of a benevolent dictator, if there's just a God out there and He just created anything, but He's not Father, then you are just a subject in His kingdom. But you and I know that there's a different rules for the subjects in the king's kingdom and the son and daughter of the king. Right? There's a difference. And if the king, if the creator of the universe is Father, if He makes Himself our Father, that changes it from being a subject to having a relationship. Not only that, but it also means we have favor. What the normal riffraff of the kingdom, or even the nobility of the kingdom may not get, we can get. Because we can go to Daddy. The fact that it's the same thing my kids play on me all the time. They'll have had a horrendous day, especially in the way that they speak to their mother. That's the hot issue in our household, the way they speak to Mom. And then something will come up that they really want to do, and they know they've blown it. But what they do is they get their sweet face on, and they come walking in, and they go, "Daddy, sorry the way I treated Mom. Do you think it would be okay if..." And why do they feel comfortable doing that? Because I'm Father. At least at times, I'm even a good father. I know not everyone had a father like that. But at times, I'm a good father. And they know, even though they've blown it, they can kind of pull the daddy strings. And though Daddy seems tough and serious to everybody on the outside, they know better. And while everybody else kind of looks at this big, grand God on the outside, you know what, children? We know better. He's a softie. He's our Father. That's why it's important. And then goes on to say that he is the Almighty, the Almighty. And I could stress a lot of aspects of this, but I want to give you just 4, and these are in your notes. Just 4. First of all, that God is eternal. He is eternal. Psalms 91:2 says this, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, in other words, before there was anything, or you brought forth the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Let me just kind of give you an illustration to help you. Avery, would you come and pick up this side of this rope? And then Rick, would you come and pick up this side of this rope and just pull it tight and get as high as you can without your arm hurting? Let's just say this rope, this should be the middle right here. So take your end and go as far back as you can. And without doing that. There we go. So imagine this was time and space, if you would, as we understand it. And imagine this rope didn't actually end with where Rick was, but it went out the doors, it went out the building, and just kept going with no end. And same thing, the end that Avery's holding, as he was at the end, went through that wall, went through Gateway Neighborhood Center, and just went on and on and on. This black tape here in the middle, this is time as you and I know it. This is the beginning of time. This is the end of time, whenever that happens. We're somewhere, we're not even a speck. We're not even that big. 2014 on this timeline. The nature of God is the rope all the way that way. And the nature of God is the rope all that way. And you and I aren't even concerned with this. We're concerned with one little basic speck of dust. Actually, a speck on the speck of dust of time. God is eternal. Does that give you a little better picture? All right, let's go ahead and just lay this on the ground in front. He is eternal. The next thing is that God is everywhere. He is everywhere. There's a fancy word that says omnipresent. Just go with God is everywhere. In Psalm 139, it says this, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. There's nowhere you could go, no spaceship you can get on that you could go and God not be there. That means that he is present with you here. He is present with your loved and family across the country. He is present with those on the other side of the world. He is present. Not only that, not only is he present in the present, meaning time and space, but God functions in such a way, and there's no way our minds can grasp this, which is what makes him God. But if you would imagine that little speck that I call time, okay? God, in essence, has 1 foot at the beginning of time and 1 foot at the end of time. And for him, all that time is happening at the same time. Now, we had no concept of that 100 or so years ago. But with Einstein and others now, we actually are beginning to develop concept of that actually, theoretically, maybe can be done. But for God, it's been a reality since he created time. He is everywhere, at all times. Thirdly, God knows everything. The fancy word is omniscient, which means he knows everything. In Psalm 139, again, the beginning, it says this, O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. O Lord, you hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. God knows everything. Past, present, future, process it faster than the fastest supercomputer, and unlike a computer, knows what it means and why it exists and why it works that way and its purpose. Unlike man, God completely understands gravity, what it is and how it works. We can just say it exists. We have no clue why. But God knows. Lastly, God is all-powerful. The fancy word is omnipotent, which means God is all-powerful. Job 42:2, Job says this, I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. In other words, there's nothing that God can't do. And if you can imagine, anything that you can imagine, truth is you're using what you understand. And what you understand is because of the world around you. Well, if God created the world around you and how it existed and how it interrelates, then obviously there's nothing that you can think or imagine that God couldn't do, because he already created the very things that create the thoughts in your head in the first place. God can do anything. He is all powerful. Now, those are the facts. The fact is he's eternal. The fact is that he's everywhere, that he knows everything, and he's all powerful. But why is that important? Other than it looks really good on a resume. Well, I thought of many different reasons, but for you and me, it came down to one word: hope. Hope. First of all, why does it matter that God is eternal? Because for most of us, that little speck of dust sucks. I mean, many of us have already won the lottery. You were born in America, in this time and space. But even many of us who were that blessed have daily challenges. And if this is all there is, remember, most people didn't even live past 30 years old, past childhood for most of time, and a lot of countries still today. We take that for granted. But even today, most countries, people die pretty young. And if they don't, they just barely survive. And there is no hope that it's going to get better. There's no hope their economy is going to get better. There's no hope that they're not going to do what their mother and father did and just exist. There is no hope if this is all they have. Even if you're blessed to be born in the United States, you may have had a wreck of a family life when you were growing up that just makes it impossible to get to a healthy place. You may have something ravaging your body, things that ravish your soul. And if this is the totality of life, there's no hope. But if God is eternal and he invites us into eternity, look at the rest of the rope. I can put up with this little thing, even though it doesn't seem so little to me, in the perspective of eternity. That makes a difference. That makes a difference. If God is everywhere at all times, I'm never alone, even in my loneliest moments. Even when I feel like no one else loves me, God is there. He is present. There is hope. No matter what the doctors tell me, no matter what thoughts I have about, I just will not be able to overcome this. No matter how bad that addiction has you in a chokehold, there is hope because God is almighty. And the Almighty One has the power to heal you. Now, that healing may come in the form of taking you into eternity. Or it could come in, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes it comes in the form of it being gone. Or, here's a huge one, which we often don't pray for, but God does do. Sometimes we keep it and we find that we can live better with having that brokenness than we ever did when we didn't have it. But for someone who there is no God, there is no power, or there is a powerful God, but he's so distant, he's not Father, there's no hope. But because God is almighty, we always have hope. Lastly, the creed says that he is maker of heaven and earth. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Nehemiah 9:6 says, you alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all their starry hosts, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heaven worship you. God created it all. And why is it important that he's maker of heaven and earth? Now, I'll tell you what I'm not going to tell you. That means that evolution is wrong and creation's right. I'm not telling you that. What I'm telling you is that God created. If he spoke it and he created it, it was God. If he decided to use evolution, a pool that developed into something else, let me tell you, it would take God for evolution to work. I'm not telling you tongue-in-cheek. Look at the science. The probability of a planet just being in the right position is almost near zero, let alone being in the right position and having water. That's even closer to zero. Now, it's in the right position with water and life is in it. I mean, now you're at zero. Yeah. No, not only do you have life, but that life somehow advances from a micro to water stuff. Now you're in science fiction. Yeah. In terms of probability, don't ask me, ask your scientists. The probability then of that fish developing the ability to breathe. Okay, you know what I'm going. By the time you get to humankind and evolution, you're beyond science fiction. Right. You're in pure Dr. Seuss book. Now, if God is involved, it could happen. Right. So the why has nothing to do with evolution. Here's the why, though. However he decided to do it, first of all, you have inherent value. If God didn't create you, then you're on the same level as the mud. I mean, you might not think you are, but that's your thought. It's your opinion. But in essence, you're the same elements, just rearranged a different way. But if God created you, you have inherent value. Not only because the Bible says he created you, but he created you in his image. In his image. You have inherent value. No matter what lot this life gives you, no matter whether you're born in Haiti, in Iraq, whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you belong to the Islamic State or the United States of America or North Korea, whether you're male or female, you have value because God created you. Not only that, but you have purpose because he created you with a purpose in mind. It matters that God created the heaven and the earth. And that, my brothers and sisters, is our heritage. That, children of God, are your roots. That they're the one God, the maker of heaven and earth, the only God. Not just one path among many. There is one God and one path. And he is your Father. And he is your maker. And he is all powerful. And you are his favored child.